Brexit to affect Vietnam export to the EU. Removal of obstacles to businesses. Hello and thank you for tuning into another edition of BizLine brought to you by VTV International. You're with me, Lina Fatman, as usual. We'll start our show with several headlines in the economic and business scene for the past week. According to the Vietnam Timber and Forest Products Association, prices of wood products exported to the UK will decline by 5 to 7% due to Brexit. As such, export turnover to this market will sharply decrease. In addition, the devaluation of the pound and the euro caused by Brexit will definitely have an impact on garment and textile exporters. Material prices will have to be renegotiated due to changes in the exchange rate, directly influencing enterprises from the fourth quarter this year and leading to the disruption of orders in 2017. In short term, Brexit will have an immediate impact on the sector's production and sales, as well as on the jobs of Vietnamese workers, eventually influencing export growth rate to the EU this year. Vietnam's gross domestic product growth in the first half of 2016 decreased compared to the same period last year. According to the General Statistics Office, GDP in the first 6 months this year increased year-on-year by 5.52%. The growth rate is higher than the same period between 2012 and 2014, but lower than 6.32% recorded in the first half in 2015. The decline was attributed to global economic fluctuations that had affected Vietnam. In addition, abnormal changes in weather conditions, such as the cold in northern provinces or drought and salinity in the south, have influenced agriculture and production activities. Total registered foreign direct investment in the first half of 2016 reached more than $11.2 billion, an increase of 105% compared to the same period last year, according to the Foreign Investment Agency. Manufacturing and processing industries continued to be the top sectors, receiving FDI of $8.06 billion, comprising 71% of the total registered foreign direct investment. During the period, 61 countries and territories invested in Vietnam. South Korea remained the leading investor with 35% of the FDI pledged to the country. Japan was the runner-up, accounting for 10%. Among the 53 localities, the northern port city of Hai Phong was the most attractive destination for foreign investors with $1.74 billion, comprising 15.4% of the total registered FDI. Japan will maintain preferential ODA loans to Vietnam, according to the chief of the economic section of the Embassy of Japan in Vietnam, Katsuro Nagai. ODA loans will be allocated for the environment, climate change mitigation, healthcare, natural disaster recovery, and human resources development. Japan also has its STEP scheme, which offers very concessional ODA loans in other sectors, while the World Bank plans to cut loans for Vietnam next year, and the ADB is mulling the end of ADF loans in 2019. Japan will continue its ODA plans with the hope that the Vietnamese government efficiently utilizes Japanese ODA in the country's socio-economic development. Vietnam's agricultural, forestry and fishery export turnover in the first half of 2016 reached $15.05 billion, an increase of 5.4% compared to the same period last year, according to the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. The export value of major agricultural produce was $7.32 billion, up 5.1% from the same period last year. Exports of coffee, rice, and rubber decreased, while cashew exports increased by 11.1% with $1.2 billion. Seafood export value reached over $3 billion, up 3.8% compared to the same period last year. Major forestry products in the period contributed $3.33 billion to the total export value, down 0.1%. By the end of June, credit growth of Vietnam's economy has reached 7%. This figure was announced by the State Bank of Vietnam on June the 29th, which is the highest level in the last 5 years. However, credit growth in the first half of 2016 only reached over one-third of this year's target. The director of the credit department under the State Bank said that the credit growth rate in the last 6 months is not a big concern because the peak periods for credit growth are the third and fourth quarters. The State Bank also said that credit loans in the past period are mainly allocated for 5 priority sectors, including agriculture, technology export, supporting industries, and SMEs. Vietnam has continuously been listed among the world's top 30 attractive emerging retail markets since 2008, according to the ranking in the Global Retail Development Index of the U.S. A.T. Kearney Company. From 2011 to 2015, Vietnam saw continuous growth in retail turnover, worth $111 trillion, accounting for 76.2% of the total retail and consumption value. Many market research companies and experts forecast that the retail markets of Vietnam will see great prospects for high growth in the future, driven by a population of 91.7 million people with high consumption demands. The retail models with the most potential, which are also the strengths of foreign retailers in Vietnam's market, are shopping malls and general supermarkets. We have just reviewed some of the several business and economic highlights over the past week. Up next, let's learn more about the updating process of the business conditions regulations in our crosstalk. 10 years since the 2005 enterprise law was introduced, around 7,000 new business conditions have been issued across various fields. They've created an expensive burden for businesses and caused a drop in the number of enterprises. While Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc is determined to help businesses and strengthen the market, insiders say cutting the business licensing procedures required by law remains the biggest challenge. The deadline for eliminating all unnecessary business conditions July the 1st came. In this episode, Mr. Phan Đức Hiếu, Vice President of the Central Institute of Economic Management, will give us deeper insight into what the government ministries and agencies is doing about this issue. Thank you very much for joining us. Since Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc took office, he has been holding meetings with government agencies to ask them to review the shortcomings of the laws on enterprise and laws on investment. So what do you think about this move?
The message from the new Prime Minister in particular and the new government is very clear that they try to provide an enabling business environment for the development of the private businesses. The meeting with the private enterprises when the new Prime Minister taking his office is his commitment of the development of the economy.
The 2005 enterprise law defines business condition as a requirement which an enterprise must satisfy or perform when it conducts a specific line of business. Business conditions are demonstrated by way of a business license, certificate of satisfaction of conditions for businesses, requirements for legal capital, and so on. Clause 5 in Article 7 of the 2005 Enterprise Law states that ministries, ministerial level agencies, people's councils, people's committees are not permitted to determine business conditions. However, thousands of these conditions have been found in circulars and other documents issued in recent years. But the new Investment Law 2014 requires that business conditions would only be regulated in government decrees only, instead of both ministry circulars and decrees as they currently are. These kinds of business conditions all became invalid on July 1st, 2016. Ministries for months have been speeding up projects to complete the draft decrees. Currently, Vietnam has the largest number of business conditions in the world, according to the Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry. More business conditions mean less businesses.
So you also participated in the drafting process. Can you share with us what's new, what's being debated, what's there in the reviewing process?
The meeting referred to the process of reviewing all the regulations that are imposing the legal requirements on the businesses. According to the new investment law, all the relevant ministries, provincial people's committee are not allowed to issue the regulations that impose the requirements on the business. After 1st July 2015, the date when the investment law came into force, all the relevant ministries have to review all the regulations that impose the business conditions in order to remove unnecessary business conditions. The remaining necessary business conditions and the business conditions after being simplified are submitted to the government in form of the government decree.
How many should be eliminated right away?
Up to now, I think we don't have a clear statistic about the number of the regulations, but as an independent reviewer, we know that there may be 170 circulars. Two ministries, including the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development and the Ministry of Health, have heavy jobs. For the Ministry of Health, this time they have reviewed maybe 70 circulars in total. And the Ministry of Agriculture and the Rural Development from 30 to 35 circulars containing the business conditions.
According to Decree 19, which guides gas businesses, each gas distributor has to own 100,000 units of 12 kilogram capacity type cylinders and a storage tank with a minimum capacity of 300 cubic meter. However, according to some gas businesses, to meet this requirement, they have to buy tens of thousands of additional cylinders, which costs them hundreds of thousands of US dollars.
Những doanh nghiệp nhỏ như chúng tôi chỉ yêu cầu khoảng tầm 1 vạn đến 2 vạn vỏ bình là có thể đáp ứng nhu cầu thị trường. Nhưng trong khi đó nghị định là yêu cầu 10 vạn vỏ bình mới đáp ứng được, thì còn 8 vạn vỏ bình mà tôi để đâu, không có kho để chứa.
Meanwhile, in the automobile industry, the Circular 20 by the Ministry of Industry and Trade requires that businesses must officially authorized by manufacturers. This is hard to achieve for 200 Vietnamese car importers.
Một hãng ô tô sẽ đặt một cái đại lý của mình tại Việt Nam, chứ không bao giờ để cung cấp tất cả cho các cái nhà phân phối thứ cấp khác.
According to experts, more business conditions can be adjusted or even removed entirely if authorities take more careful considerations.
Rất nhiều các cái mà chúng ta đang gọi là điều kiện kinh doanh hiện nay thì thực sự không phải điều kiện kinh doanh, mà là những cái điều kiện, các cái quy chuẩn kỹ thuật và không nhất thiết phải được quy định bởi nhà nước.
However, according to the business community, they cannot access the drafts and are not surveyed by the ministry about these documents.
Cái cách làm mà vội vã như hiện nay và không lấy ý kiến doanh nghiệp như hiện nay thì rõ ràng là nó là một chiều, nó là lệch lạc, nó đáp ứng được một phía thôi, còn nó có thực sự hợp lý hay không thì không thể trả lời được.
However, many argue that the government and the National Assembly need to closely monitor the reviewing process so that business conditions can better manage business operations and not make them more difficult.
Some people argue that there's a risk that all of the circulars, once escalated into decrees, will disguise and maybe even create more challenging, more complicated administrative procedures to businesses. What do you think?
I totally share with the view they agree that nothing changed. If all the business conditions that have been issued in form of circular we brought into the new government decrees, we have to follow stricter procedure for making the government decree. But it's not all about that. One of the benefits that the business community may get from this process of reviewing from now, if the ministries want to impose any requirements or business condition on a specific activity or business operation, they have to submit it to the government for approval and for issuing in terms of the government decree. Before this time, it is easier for the ministries to issue the circular. But now, if they want to make the government decree, they have to follow a stricter and a more complicated procedure for making the government decree.
Can you give us one example of what decrees that are being reviewed and changed?
I think because of the limited time, this time the government changed the way to approve a huge number of the decrees. Normally, the ministry who is in charge of drafting the decree, we do the public consultation and then improve the draft after listening to the comments from the stakeholders, submitting the draft to the Ministry of Justice for appraisal. And after that, submit to the government for discussion and approval. But this time, because of the limited time, the government organized a series of meetings where they sit together with stakeholders to review all the draft decree. This is a very good opportunity that I haven't seen before, where the business community can sit directly with the government and also the ministry. And during this process, regulations or provisions in the draft decrees have been improved. Through the meeting, business community is required to remove all the unclear terms. The ministry, they have to accept a lot of comments like that.
Before the June cabinet meeting took place, the Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry had drafted a 325-page report to give feedback and comments on the over 300 business environment conditions specified in the draft decrees. The Chamber requested the removal of 70 unnecessary conditions and made amendments to more than 100 other business investment conditions specified in 49 draft decrees. The majority of the recommendations raised at the meeting were welcomed by ministries and other agencies.
Tất cả các cái bộ ngành tham gia cái cuộc đối thoại hôm nay thì đều thể hiện một cái sự thống nhất cao và về căn bản là nhất trí với những cái kiến nghị của cộng đồng doanh nghiệp thông qua cái rà xét và kiến nghị của VCCI. Tuy nhiên trong một số lĩnh vực thì những vấn đề mà có ý kiến khác nhau cũng còn nhiều, chẳng hạn như trong lĩnh vực công thương, và chúng tôi đã có thống nhất với nhau rằng sẽ tổ chức cái cuộc đối thoại giữa cộng đồng doanh nghiệp với lại Bộ Công Thương về tất cả những cái vấn đề liên quan đến cái điều kiện kinh doanh trong lĩnh vực này.
Many provisions in the draft decrees which are not business conditions but standard techniques and processes have been proposed to be addressed in circulars instead of the main decree.
Cái tinh thần tích cực trong cái việc rà xét để sửa đổi các cái quy định của pháp luật mới được diễn ra một cách nó rất là tích cực trong thời gian 2 tháng qua, kể từ sau cuộc họp của chính phủ mà Thủ tướng yêu cầu là không được chậm trễ trong việc hoàn thành đúng cái thời hạn mùng 1 tháng 7.
This is the first time representatives of the business community have actually sat down in a room with state authorities to discuss the provisions in a draft decree. This is considered a new way to promote the reform of administrative procedures and improve the business and investment environment.
How can the state manage the quality of those new decrees?
The investment law has set the criteria for reviewing the business conditions. There are basically two criteria. One is a necessity. One business activity will be regulated activity only if a ministry proves that there's a risk to the public security, to the social security, and to the health of the people. That's one precondition. But even when there's a necessity for making intervention into the business operation, all the business conditions and or requirements that are imposed by the government in this context should be reasonable and do not impose unnecessary burden on the businesses. So there are basically two criteria. One is a necessity, and the second one is it should be reasonable and cost-saving.
So when business conditions are eliminated, does that mean that the ministry's intervention into the Vietnamese economy will be less? What do you think about this?
One of the objective reviewing of the business conditions this time is to lessen the state intervention into the economy. One of the principles of the market economy is that the enterprises will decide what to produce and how to do, not the government. Now there are a lot of regulations that do not allow the business to do what they want to do. So that kind of government intervention is contrary to the market economy principle.
Business conditions and enhancing the legal system dominated the government's monthly meeting for June. During the working session, the government office revealed that most of the decrees on investment and business, which support the implementation of the laws on investment and enterprises, have been issued on schedule so that the laws could take effect starting July the 1st. Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc stressed that the new decrees need to liberate productive forces, facilitate businesses and people, and drive the country's development.
Trên tinh thần tạo điều kiện cho người dân và doanh nghiệp, chúng ta kiên quyết xóa cho được lợi ích nhóm, chi phối chính sách. Nhưng đồng thời, một cái việc hết sức đặt ra trong quản lý, đó là nhà nước phải quản lý bằng thể chế chính sách để tạo nên hành lang pháp lý phát triển tốt đẹp, không bị lạm dụng mặt trái của kinh tế thị trường.
49 decrees instructing the implementation of the law on investment and enterprises have been submitted. The Prime Minister held the determination and efforts in completing these documents. He also said the government will continue to consult the people and businesses on the draft of this decree before signing.
Cái đổi mới rất quan trọng để giải phóng sức sản xuất, để người dân và doanh nghiệp làm những việc mà luật pháp không cấm mà thôi. Vì thế cuộc tranh luận vừa qua cũng diễn ra hết sức quyết liệt để chúng ta thực sự là giải phóng sức sản xuất.
Prime Minister Phúc also asked cabinet members and state agencies to innovate their ways of building legal documents in order to create favorable conditions for businesses. Specifically, the process of collecting public opinions and expert feedback on the documents must be emphasized.
So what difficulties will arise after July the 1st?
Reviewing business conditions is only one part of requirement made by the new investment law. All the business conditions and related regulations should be reviewed annually by the ministries. But this time only limited to the business conditions that have been issued in contrary to the new investment law. So this is only a part of the requirement. The government and also the ministry have to do this kind of work every year, even at the request of the business community when they found that there are some regulations that are making barriers for the business.
So in your opinion, what changes should be made in the way the government intervene into business activities?
As a person who involved very much in this process, I think that government decrees on the business conditions do not meet the expectation of the business community.
Can you explain more about the gap between what can be done and the expectation of the private sector?
Both sides all agree on the objective of the state management, but the difference is in terms of how the government should intervene into the business operation. This time, I think the VCCI, the Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry, have been collecting all the comments reflected the best interest of the business community. Not all, but I think the main interest businesses, they strongly advise the government not to provide the requirements on how to make the products or to provide the services. The requirement in terms of licensing, approving should be replaced by the requirement of notifying. So the business, they will decide how to produce the products and notify the government if necessary.
So should we hope that maybe next year or the year after there would be further liberalization?
I think the 1st July 2016 is the very beginning. This time the ministries and the government focus only on the business conditions that have been issued in form of circular. They did not review the business conditions that have been in form of the government decrees or in form of the laws. So this time of reviewing is only a part of the overall requirement made by the investment law. The investment law requires that at least once a year, ministries have to review all the business conditions and related regulations. So maybe from now to the end of this year, there will be second process of reviewing the business conditions, but with wider and more comprehensive scope of reviewing. The next review not focus on the business conditions, but the list of 267 business condition activities.
Thank you very much for joining us. The Prime Minister emphasized that the government should shift from using administrative orders to creating conditions that assist development. He also instructed that state managerial functions remain separate from the market economy. Ministries and local people's committees must focus on simplifying and publicizing administrative procedures, getting rid of sub-licenses, encouraging startups, and cutting taxes. The businesses community is optimistic about this new direction and looks forward to its effectiveness. And that also wraps up this edition of BizLine. Thank you very much for watching. You can always rewatch our show at vtv4.vn or youtube.com/vtv4go. From our team here in Hanoi, until next time.